are in fact live. I do believe we might be live. Alright. I hope we are live. I'm not exactly sure if we are live. Let's find out. Live and audio good. Is that current? Because I was signing into an old stream here. I'm streaming on StreamYard today, and it's a little bit clunky to say the least. Can you hear my voice, my friends? This is current. All right, fantastic. So you can hear me okay right now? For those expecting a super pro, polished, professional stream today, I am sorry to disappoint you, my friends. This is going to be a super casual stream today. All right. Cool. Okay, let's see here. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to be talking about how I've incorporated the big Eurorack system with some stuff in Ableton Live here on the laptop. I was hoping to stream on the laptop today because that's my main streaming device. I cannot use OBS Livestream Studio on my big Mac, which is over here, because it no longer supports the older operating system that this is running. So I'm having to stream with StreamYard today. I'm going to do my best to go over and explain, like, literally how everything is set up today. I'm going to explain what modules I'm using. I'm going to explain how I'm using Ableton. I'm hoping to explain, how I've got the MIDI controller here. This is the Novation Launch Control XL. I'm going to try to explain how that is controlling Ableton and how this whole hybrid setup is working. But right off the jump, the very first thing that I want to get across is I'm not showing you today the best way to do something. I'm not showing you the cheapest way to do something. I'm not showing you the easiest way to do something. I'm not showing you the fastest way to do something. So for those who are looking for that kind of content, this stream is not your type of content, okay? This is one way that you can use some of the gear as a sound designer and, as the lead sound designer for Electronisounds. I have a lot of gear. I have way more gear than the average person needs, and my intention with the gear is just to use what I have in fun, exploratory, and exciting ways. I'm not typically looking for the cheapest way to do things or the fastest way to do things or, any of that type of thing. So it's going to be a long and maybe boring stream today. For those who maybe aren't familiar with what this setup is sounding like right now, I'm just going to jam for a few minutes, maybe let a few more people get on the stream. Looks like we've got 10 people watching now. Thank you very much if you're hanging out today. It's just going to be a casual and fun and educational stream in how this setup is working. So Ableton here is my main clock for this setup. It's running on a Mac laptop, and basically what I've got is I've got the Novation Launch Control XL plugged into the laptop so that I can control what's going on the laptop using this controller and not having to interact with the laptop or use the mouse or anything. Just gonna take a deep breath. It's been a while since I've done a live stream, and this is a lot of talking, and I'm a little nervous. Okay, so basically I've got most of most of the content that's coming out of the Ableton setup here is like melodic content, and then I'm basically using the Eurorack setup over here for the majority of the drums in this setup, and also the bass line. So we're going to talk about what modules I'm using. Feeling a little congested today, sorry about that. We're going to talk about what modules I'm using for the drums. Again, you know, you can take a look here and see that I've got lots of stuff unpatched. This is not, you know, a way to, like, you know, be really efficient and get the most out of your system and squeeze every little HP out of your, no, it's none of that. It's just one way that I'm using some of these modules that I have, okay? You can see lots of stuff not plugged in, not being used. So I can start up the jam by just pressing a button here on the launch controller, okay, and then boom, we're just off and running. And what you hear there is you're hearing some drums and you're hearing a bass line. The drums are coming out of various modules here in the system that we're going to talk about. Lots of sample-based modules, because I'm a sample creator. I really like a sample-based workflow. And the bass sound is coming out of the Electronisounds bassline module, and I can tweak the cutoff on that. I can adjust the resonance on that, bring up a sub level. I can detune it, make it really kind of angry sounding. We can get pretty crazy with this module. I really like this module for the variety of tones I can get out of it. But for the most part, since this is kind of chilled dub techno, I'm keeping it, you know, pretty tame. More sort of down in that sort of a territory, right? Now, what is controlling the bass line? What is sequencing that melodic pattern? For that, I'm using the Precision Disruptor sequencer, which is this really large module down here. This module allows me to set the amount of gates that I want, so I can have all 16 notes if I want to be triggering, or I can pull this slider and have no notes triggering at all. See how the bass line just sort of disappeared there? And now there's no bass at all, right? So the more I push this slider up, the more notes appear on the top row. I can also add some accents to those notes. I can accent the whole row of notes if I want, using the second slider, or just a couple of those notes if I want to. So I can take the notes out, I can bring as many as I want in, or I can, you know, affect those accents, have no accents going to the bassline module, or I can have all of the notes being accented with just this slider here. See how that second row of lights is kind of disappearing as I move this slider, right? Now I can adjust the amount of slides or ties that are happening between the notes, like a 303 sequencer, using this third knob, so I can make the pattern really, you know, glidey per se, or I can keep it really staccato and not have those notes being tied together. I can have just a couple of them being tied together if I want to. Okay, and I can adjust how much of this accent is affecting the cutoff on the bassline module. I can have it affecting a lot of that cutoff knob, or barely affecting it at all. So the key here that I'm trying to get across is that I've got a lot of possible customization in the tones and timbres of the bass sound here by using the Eurorack setup for the bass line. Now, this module is an amazing sequencer. It doesn't just have to play the same bass line over and over again. I can store 16 different pre-programmed bass lines in the module, so I can click a button down at the bottom and change the pattern. So here we've got, you know, let's listen to that bass line for a moment. Let's say I want to change the bass line to a different one of the pre-programmed bass lines. I just click the next button. Say I want to change to the bass line again, right? I just click one of these presets at the bottom. I can, you know, have it up to 16 pre-created bass lines that are, you know, stored inside the sequencer. And if that's not enough, I can generate new bass lines on the fly that are going to take into account how I've got the slider set, how many notes in my pattern, how many accents are happening in the pattern, and how many note ties are happening in the pattern. All I have to do is press these two buttons right here, and it's just going to spit out a random new bass line. So I can just sit here and jam until the cows come home and just keep changing that bass line without even worrying about the presets. I can just keep randomizing it, and it's going to keep it in the same key that I've got it set in, and it's going to take into account. So if I take away the accents, and if I take away the slides, and I remove some of those notes, so it's a little sparser bass line, okay? And I want to randomize that so it'll create a brand new, entirely new bass line on the fly. I can just press these two buttons here. And if I'm, say, not happy with that, I can just randomize it again. All right. I'm going to move the camera a little bit further back now so that I can check in with the chat, see who's actually tuned in. We got Ballard Vibes in the chat. Thanks for tuning in. We got Rabbit Bat in the chat. What's happening? We got Vamp Acid on the chat. Thanks for tuning in. Says he digs the review I did for the Nano Modules Kaisha case. Hey, thanks for that. I really love that case, and I'm still getting a lot of use out of that case. Can you guys hear my voice okay in comparison with the music? Is it okay if I'm talking over the music as this is going? Can you still hear me? We got Inky the chat. Inky the chat. You got Inky the cat in the chat. Sorry for botching your name there, Inky. All right, thanks for tuning in. We got the Crazy Rabbit in the chat. Hey, what's happening, homie? We got Fusion Breaks in the chat. All right, we got Ives in the chat. Perfect levels, fantastic. I was having some really strange issues with the tech this morning, and I was trying to get my Mac laptop to be the streaming apparatus today so that I could use OBS. But for those who don't want to hang out on a super, you know, long, boring kind of chat type of, you know, live stream, this video will live on the channel, and I am going to go back through and put timestamps in this as to, you know, where in the video I'm talking about what. So you can always kind of come back to it later as a point of reference if you don't have the time to hang out today, or if you just, you know, get bored hanging out on these long streams, because this has the potential to go pretty long today. I haven't done a stream in quite some time, so I'm pretty unpolished, but I thought this was the perfect setup to really break down how I'm doing it. So that's what we're doing today, and it's just a fun, you know, casual stream. Please feel free to ask any questions. We got Busy Crack in the chat. What's up, man? And I'll do my best to answer those. I've only can see a really small chat window, but I will definitely do my best to answer questions. If you ask a question that I miss it, please just ask it again until I see it, and then I'll do my best to answer that. Because we don't have anything to hide here. I'm not trying to keep any secret sauce to myself. That's the whole point of this channel, and the whole point of streams like this is to share the information with, you know, so people can utilize this kind of information in their setups, you know. All right. So what we're hearing again is we're hearing some drums now, and we're hearing this bass line. That's all just coming out of the Eurorack. Okay? You might notice that there's a big crash on the downbeat every now and again. That's a sample of a down filter. That's for those of you who watch my live streams before, you know I love those down filters. And what that's for is that it helps me to sort of stay on the grid per se. Every time I hear that down filter, I know that that's a 1, okay? And then things are programmed to sort of automagically change every 16 bars from that point of 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, and 4, 2. I came counting's off. 5, 2, 3, 4, 6, 2, 3, 4, 7, 2, 3, 4, 8, 2, 3. It's bringing something else. 9, 2, 3, 4, 10, 2, 3, 4, 11, 2, 3, 4, 12, 2, 3, 4, 13, 14, 15, and 16. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so hear that crash come in on that downbeat. That's there to really keep me on the grid, per se. You see how my hands are free, but yet that melodic element that we were hearing changed without me touching anything? That's really, really important in how I've got this system set up. All right. So, three, four, two, right? Okay. So that crash is going to happen no matter what I do. And so, like, even if I get lost during the performance or during the stream, all I have to do is kind of wait to hear that crash, and then I'm back on the grid again. I find that just immensely helpful. And, you know, just something that I've been using for many, many years as like my technique to stay on the grid. Okay. I can also stop everything with the controller. I've got it all set up so I don't have to touch the laptop, which is running at any time during the set. I'm going to grab a tiny sip of coffee. Okay. So now let's talk just a little bit about Ableton and what it's actually doing. For one, it's providing the master clock. Now, how is that happening? How are we getting a clock out of the computer and starting up the system over here? I've got a USB-C to MIDI adapter. So there's a USB-C cable that's coming out of the laptop here, and that's got at the end of it, that's got a MIDI in 5-pin connector and a MIDI out 5-pin connector. The MIDI in is just dangling off here loose because I'm not sending any MIDI into the laptop. I'm only sending the MIDI signal out of the laptop. Now, how are we converting that MIDI signal into the Eurorack information and starting and stopping everything in time with Ableton? For those who know about latency, I want to say right off the jump, I'm not running any audio back into the computer. All the audio in everything you're hearing is all being routed into individual tracks in the 1010 Bluebox mixer, which is a Eurorack mixer, Eurorack version of their Bluebox mixer. It's got 12 inputs. It's got individual EQ on there, so individual levels, so I can adjust anything I want and really hone the mix before anything. I'm only recording a 2-channel mix, and I'm only sending out a 2-channel mix. We're not worrying about breaking the audio down into individual channels, and we're not routing anything back into Ableton. Okay, it's just coming out down here into my large mixer. The mixer is sending out a 2-channel audio feed into the Big Mac, which I am live streaming with. Okay, so to get the MIDI to start the system, I'm running that MIDI, the USB-C to MIDI. I'm running that into an adapter here, which turns that MIDI signal into a TRS 3.5 millimeter connection, and I'm sending that into the MIDI in jack on this big old Erica Sense black sequencer. That's really the only thing that this sequencer is doing in the entire session, is just handling the MIDI and the clock out to everything else. I can use this sequencer to program 4 channels of CV and gate, like program out melodics in the Eurorack stuff, but I'm not using it in any of those capacities. It's only accepting MIDI clock, and when it receives that transport start signal, it just starts going. I need several different clock signals in the system, and I need several different reset signals in the system so that the different sequencers that I'm using will all start on the downbeat and know when the 1 is and be in sync with each other. So I'm duplicating the clock. I'm taking an output of the clock signal and the reset signal from that Erica Synths black sequencer. I'm routing that into a multiple here, which is just a way to copy the signal to multiple different outputs, and I'm sending one version of the clock and one version of the reset into my sequencer for the bass here, the precision disruptor from Anti-Culture. I'm sending another version of the clock and the reset signal over here to this big drum sequencer from Erica Synths as well. For those of you who are going to be hanging around, you'll see a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are Erica Synths modules. I have a huge fetish with Erica Synths stuff, especially their filters. If I had to only pick one brand of filters to use for the rest of my life in hardware, it would be Erica Synths filters. Thank you, Erica Synths. And so this is a large drum sequencer, and it is receiving the clock signal and the reset signal so that it knows when the downbeat is. That's how we're getting MIDI between the computer and the hardware system, so that when I press go, that this just starts going and it's all in sync together. Now, we're only hearing just drums and bass so far, and that's all coming out of this system here. And we're going to continue to talk about each individual sound and how I'm getting the individual sounds into the mix. But first, let's go ahead and add a little bit more from Ableton. Let's add a top loop. Now, what is a top loop for those who may not know? A top loop is just like another percussion loop of some kind. Did you hear how we got some percussion that just sort of changed in rhythm and style without me doing anything? Let's listen for a little bit. And every 16 bars, that top loop is going to spit out another top loop. It's picking from a list of loops right here that just goes down and down. There's probably 50 to 100 top loops that it can randomly pick from. And it'll change on the 1 when we hear that crash cymbal. Okay, do you hear how the percussion just changed there and I didn't have to touch anything? I'm holding the camera with one hand, and Ableton changed that auto-magically. Now let's talk about Ableton and Automagic loop changing for a moment. Okay, so I've got this just filled with loops. I started with some of the sample packs that I make from Electronisounds. This has really got, the heart and soul of these loops are from my Devious Dub Techno sample pack and the Dean's Dub Bunker sample pack. And those, contain chord loops and all that kind of stuff. The top loops, and effects loops. And what I do is I just load those into their own channel per se. I've got a total of 5 different channels of loops here, and I tell Ableton using something called follow actions that every 16 bars it should randomly pick another loop from that column of loops. So out of the 50 to 100 top loops, every 16 bars, it's going to grab another one of those top loops randomly. And I've got a channel here of synth loops that I can, I've basically the Launch Control XL is acting like, a mixer. I can just pull one of these faders up and bring in that channel, or I can pull all the faders down and have nothing, being heard out of Ableton, because I've MIDI routed these. You can map, your MIDI controller any way you want inside of Ableton. And how I've got this mapped is that these are just, acting as levels like you would think on any normal mixer. So I can bring up a track of top loops. I can bring up a track of synth loops. I can bring up a track of loops that I recorded out of the Virus Darkstar synthesizer. That way I don't have to worry about using it live or changing presets live. They're just recorded out and they're in Ableton and ready to go. And I've got a channel with effects loops. It's like 50 to 100 effects loops there. And every 16 bars, it's going to randomly choose another one of those. And lastly, I've got a channel of just more chord stabs, like dub, not more rather, but like my main dub techno sounding chord stabs. Let me just bring up that one channel of chord stabs alone and start the jam. So we hear that big chord, right? We'll wait for it, sorry. Okay, that's coming on this channel, so if I pull the volume down, the chord stab goes away. And if we wait for those 16 bars to have passed, we'll hear that impact down filter come in again, and we'll hear that change to a different, chord stab. Let's just wait for it. What's happening, Steve? Thanks for tuning in. What's happening, Alien Probe? Okay, so we heard the big impact, and now that chord stab is doing something else. Right? And I didn't have to touch anything. Now, I will say that, I made all of the loops that it's got hundreds and hundreds of loops. This just takes like months and months to create something like that. Like I said a minute ago, these loops come from my sample packs that I make. A lot of them are from my Devious Dub Techno pack that took, months to make. A lot of them come from my Dean's Dub Bunker sample pack. That sample pack took months to make. So this is not like a quick or easy thing to set up. If you don't make your own loops, you can, if you're trying to make dub techno, you can get loops from me, electronisounds.com, or there's all of you, I'm sure, know where to get loops and samples, right? That's not the point. The point is that to get this to work, that all of your loops need to pretty much be at the same tempo, or at least be able to sound good when you tempo stretch them to whatever tempo you're working at. This set is at 110 beats per minute, and it's in the key of F minor. For those of you who know me, F minor is my favorite key to write in. And I often use that key extensively when I'm creating my sample packs, so that all of the loops within the pack can kind of be used together like a large Lego set. You don't want to start playing with Legos and you run out of Legos and you're like, well, let me get some more blocks. But these are erector set blocks. They don't go with my Legos. That's the most, and then you got to start searching and digging and all of that. So a lot of times I tend to just make all of the samples and loops in my content at the same key. That way, if you buy 2 of those packs, you can start meshing those together, etc. I kind of think of it like as one big giant Lego set. As long as it has the Lego brand on it, everything that's made by Lego will be compatible with other sets from Lego, right? And that's kind of the beauty of it. If you don't like F minor, you're kind of going to be shit out of luck with working with a lot of my samples, unless you want to, start, changing the pitch on those, and that's a whole other kettle of fish. But that is one of the ways in which I work and how I was able to get something like this set up. What's happening? We got ASF Stripe in the chat. We got Tollington in the chat. Good to see you guys. And so basically, all of the loops here are at 110 beats per minute, and they're all in the key of F minor. Now, everything that's in the key of F minor isn't going to go and sound good by default with everything else in the key of F minor. It takes a lot of fine tuning and tweaking, and a lot of just sitting here and letting the loops switch around randomly. Because when you're dealing with this amount of loops, just hundreds and hundreds of loops, you've got to make sure that your volume levels are consistent. That helps when you're getting your loops from the same source. I tend to make my sample packs this sort of way, so when you're combining my stuff, a lot of it is really easy to combine with the other stuff. It's all made by me, but there are some times where a loop is, too frenetic or too boring or too anything, right? And you're like, okay, that one's just not working sometimes. Let's delete that from the set. And you just have to basically do a lot of setup and a lot of testing to make sure that no matter what combination of content that these loops randomly spit out. Again, we're using the Ableton follow actions. If you don't know how to get that set up, there's about a million we're not going to do internal. I can't put the Ableton screen in the live stream today. It's just one camera. That's all I've got with StreamYard. Sorry about that. But that's what you want to learn how to do, is you want to learn how to make a big stack of loops. You want to select all of those loops, and you want to use the Ableton follow action, that at the end of however many bars, it should automatically choose a random other loop in that stack. Well, think about it though. If every single time, 16 bars passed, if we had 5 loops just completely randomizing, it might get a little hectic. It might get a little chaos, sounding. It might not sound necessarily smooth. And sometimes maybe you've got you lock into a groove because you never know what it's going to spit out combination wise. So you might lock into a groove where you're like, oh man, this is just magic right now. I want to keep this going for longer than 16 bars. That's where I'm using some looper devices that I created using the stock tools in Ableton. Again, I can't really get inside Ableton and show you all of the, the tools that I'm using here, but I can just explain them to you. So, here's the controller, and I can bring in the volume in and out of any of those 5 tracks, okay? But let's say that, let's say it brings in a really awesome, I got this up, and it's bringing in a really awesome percussion loop that's just magic sounding with whatever I have going on, right? And I don't want that to go away. I've got the first row of knobs set to turn on these loopers, and each of the 5 tracks has a 1-bar looper on it. So if I switch the knob at the first knob here in the series of knobs above each channel, if I just turn that knob, it's going to loop that track. And no matter what the other tracks do, this track will just be locked into that 1-bar loop, okay? Let me show you exactly what that sounds like. Let me go ahead and I'm going to press play here to get the groove going. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the volume up on the stabs, on the chords channel, and I'm going to lock that really fast so that it just repeats. Oops, sorry about that. Hang on. Having some sort of weird episode there. Okay, I'm going to let it sort of catch up. It had a little hiccup there. I did have some strange issues this morning. Okay, but you hear how that loop is now, that chord is now just looping every 1 bar. So I can bring it out of the mix still, and the other loops can randomize or whatever. But if I bring that up, okay, I'm a little worried about what sort of glitch happened there because the whole system wasn't quite in time as it should be. So we're going to try to start that again. I'm going to undo the loop, and I'm going to press what typically should start me, no problem. There we go. Now I'm going to try to loop this in time, guys. Waiting for that to stab to come again, right? Okay, see now how that's looping over and over again instead of just waiting to progress. Now I could bring up some percussion if I want. I could bring up an effects loop. And the key here now is that when we hear that big impact crash, the stab is not going to change now. Waiting for that. Okay, so we had a change in our top loop. We had a change in the effects loop, but we didn't have a change in that synth stab, right? Well, say that starts to get, a little monotonous. Above each of the tracks, the second row is a low-pass filter. So I can hear how I'm taming that by filtering that chord loop down so you can just barely hear it now, right? If we wanted to, I could take it out of the mix entirely, but currently it's still back there. It's just looping on its own, the filter's down, and everything else is, changing automatically every 16 bars. So I could bring in a channel of those virus loops. This is a loop from the Virus Dark Star synthesizer, and it will change every 16 bars. This top loop will change, and this effects loop will change. Again, without me having to touch anything. We're waiting for that crash here. Okay, so now we've got some changes happening. And remember, every track has a low-pass filter above it. So if I want to tweak that virus loop, I can filter it down. I can loop it too. Now, I could say leave it tucked back in the mix, right? Well, maybe I'm doing something over here, like tweaking with the bass line. Okay, hear how only a few things changed over here though when we heard that big impact. The virus dark star loop is still there. And I can filter it up again. I can take it out of the mix if we want. 3, 4. Okay. But it's still back there looping, as is that dubstep that I pulled the volume on a while ago. So if we want to bring that back into the mix. And now, remember, I filtered it down, so now I can filter that back in. And if I want to, I can unlock it in 1, 2, 3, 4, change. Now it's going to be playing whatever Ableton had it automagically switching to every 16 bars. Now let's talk about why I'm doing that. The point is that you've only got 2 hands. There's no way that I can change 5 or 6 parts live in real time right automagically. What if I get off the grid? And again, I've only got so many things I can change. So to have some things that are going to change automagically really helps the set just progress forward. I can bring all of these things out by just pulling the volumes down. Then I can focus on maybe just the bass line for a minute or some drums or something. While the volume is down, if I want, I can unlock that virus loop. I can kind of go back and reset all of the low pass filters above the channels and make sure that everything is, when I bring it in, going to come in clean. Let's bring in a top loop. So there's some percussion, right? Let's bring in an effects loop. And every 16 bars, that part of the groove will change now. Let's wait for it. Hear how we just changed the percussion? And we added, in the very far background, a really subtle effects loop. What's happening, Mars Capone? Thanks for tuning in. So that stuff will just happen. Again, if I don't want it to change, I can lock both of those. And now, no matter what happens in the set, they won't change. Let's bring in the virus loop. Let's lock that. So now, this stuff won't change, no matter what else I do. I can mess with the bass line over here. I can change the pattern of the bass line, right? I can change the timbre of that bass. One, two, and 1, 2, 3. Here we go. Oh, I'm off the grid, see? We didn't hear that downbeat, so I can just wait for it. 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, and 4, 2, 3. Let's get the kick. 6, 7, and 8, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10. Filtering down the virus. 11, 12, 2, 3. Filtering in a top loop. Filtering down my stab. Or it's not on, so filtering down the effects loop. While I'm bringing up the volume, there's my 1, right? I can start bringing in these chords by just slowly bringing up the level. But I don't always have to be counting the whole time. I can sometimes just lose myself in the jam and just wait for that downbeat impact to come in. And I can try to lock that stab if I want. Wait for it to hit again. See, now that stab is locked. And remember, I've got a low pass filter above every channel, so I can tuck it back in the mix and affect it by bringing it down now. So I can go over here, drop the kick, right? Mess with this chord sample, then bring the kick back. And now that chord is just way back in the mix, but it's still happening, right? I can bring in another synth loop at this time. Let's see, I really like that new synth texture. I can just straight lock it. Currently now, we have all 5 parts that are coming out of the laptop locked. So nothing will change automatically. I can just hold this groove for as long as I want. And that allows me to interact with other things on this side. Like bringing up the decay on that hi-hat and dropping out the kick if I want. 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2. Bring the kick back. All right. I can start maybe bringing some of these things back in, like I can filter up that top loop. Hey, what's happening, Beetle Felix? Thanks for tuning in. So again, this stuff is all locked, and I can just work that groove. I can unlock things individually. Every time I hear that, we know it's the one. So I'm filtering up the Virus Darkstar loop here. And I'll unlock it. Who knows what it will reveal? It revealed whatever loop was waiting to happen in the background. What's happening? We got Wakum in the chat. Sorry if I'm saying that incorrectly. What's happening, Hobby Grade? Happy New Year. Let's say I love that new synth loop, right? I can lock it. I can focus on it by maybe pulling everything else out of the mix. Okay, so I've locked that. I can filter it down. Then maybe bring the stabs back. Start filtering them up. Keep filtering them up. Get ready to unlock them and reveal something new. What's happening? Point 2 in the house! So I can leave, that's the key, is that I can leave any of these loops locked or unlock them and let them change automagically without me having to do anything. So I can keep the groove as static or as random as I want. And this really allows for a set that you can just sit here and jam on for as long as you can stand it, right? We got Saggy Dogs in the chat. What's happening? We got Low in the chat. What's happening, my friend? All right. And I really think that's key. Again, I can have it just pulling from any of these loops here that I've created, so it's still my content, but Ableton is spitting them out in a random way. And I'm just sort of driving the ship. But if I walk away from the ship, it will still drive itself. I'm gonna allow that to happen now. I'm gonna allow the ship to start driving itself for a moment. I'm gonna bring up all of these tracks. I'm gonna filter everything up so it's at full volume. And I'm gonna start unlocking things. In 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, unlock some more. Okay, and now I'm just gonna stand here. 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 4, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Let's drop the kick for a minute. 9, 10. I'm not driving, right? 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 2, 3, 4, 16, 2, 3, 4. Hear how we just went into a completely new section there? All 5 of the loops automagically shifted. Now, some people might consider this type of a setup cheating. I disagree wholeheartedly with that sentiment. Number one, as I've stated now probably too many times, I created all of the loops here. This is my content. This isn't loops from sample packs, but if that's what you want to do, load up Ableton with loops from, sample packs, like maybe my sample packs, for example, or whatever. I'm certainly not going to hold that against you. But I took the time. It takes months and months and months and months of like 8 to 12 hour days to create this type of content. These are all my sounds. These are all my loops. Let's bring in a stab. Let's bring in another top loop. 2, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 3, and 4. It's effects loop time. I'm gonna bring in a virus loop. 3 and 1, 2. Let's bring it in now. And let's bring in another synth loop. 2, 3. Let's bring it in. Now, when that big crash happens, nothing's locked. It's all gonna automatically shuffle. So in theory, you can just sit there, work this side of things, and not even worry about this side of things. And if something magic happens that you don't want to change, you just fucking lock it. Now everything is locked into these 1-bar loops. You can start fading things down. Filtering things down. Okay, now I've got a really dark thing happening over here. Let's talk about some Automagic stuff that's happening over here on this side. There's really not a lot of Automagic stuff happening on the Eurorack side though. Alright. What we're hearing now is we're hearing that ride symbol coming in. It's coming from a Tip Top Audio 1 sample playback module, so I can put a ride sample in there. I like to change the pitch on those, but the ride sample just disappeared, right? I've got this set up to automagically turn on and off every 16 bars, just like this stuff over here. So how am I doing that? I'm using a 0.2 module from Ritual Electronics. This is a small 1U module, and basically you send a trigger signal into it, and whenever you want it to turn on or off and allow signals to go through there. So I've got it set that every 16 bars it turns on or off, and now that ride symbol is back in the mix. I can change the pitch on that. I like to bring them really low and dirty for techno kind of stuff. And I love to mess with the tuning of the ride symbol in real time, as most of you will know. Just to create different timbres in the sections, right? Something fun to play with in real time. But we heard that downbeat, and then the ride just goes away. And every time we hear that downbeat, the ride will either come back or go away. So without me having to remember to turn it on or off with like a switch or something, it's just going to automatically turn on and off. Let's wait for a minute for it to come back. I can start filtering up this stab. But that stab is locked, so it's not going to change. I can still interact with the filter of it. Okay, so here's the ride again, right? I can change the pitch. And I do have the ride going through an Electronisounds black low pass filter, so I can filter that ride down, taking off the top frequencies and sticking it back in the mix if I want to. So a couple of different ways I can interact with that, right? I can change the pitch, or kind of change that top end timbre, or I can filter it all the way out of the mix this way if I want to. And now we won't hear it come in and out. If I want to just leave that out of the mix for a while, maybe I can filter up this top loop over here. Kind of a boring one to have locked maybe, so I'm going to unlock this top loop, which again is like a percussion loop. In 1, 2, 3, unlock it. Sometimes it doesn't bring in the most, loud or magic thing. Let's just wait for this one loop to change. When we hear the psh, this percussion loop will swap to a different percussion loop. Hear that? It's like a little hi-hat that just started happening there, but all the other melodic stuff here is just locked, and nothing's changing until I tell it to change. Let's filter up that virus loop and bring it out of the background into the foreground. So low pass filter. Hear that melodic coming back into the mix, and let's unlock it now. In 1, 2, 3. Let's try something else. Let's filter up this synth loop here now. Kind of like an arpeggio on that channel. I can bring some stuff away, like take out the top loop and fade down to the filter, the stabs. Take those out of the mix entirely. Start taking out this effects loop. Right, so the virus is unlocked. So we just heard that melodic part change. I can filter that down if I want to tuck it back in the mix. Right, I think you guys are getting what I'm laying down, hopefully. Hey, what's happening, Simon? Thanks for tuning in. Praise from on high. For those who might not be familiar with Simon, who's just entered the chat, he's one of the most amazing live musicians that I've ever seen in my entire life, and I highly recommend you check out his content. Thanks for tuning in, Simon. Hear how we just changed that melodic loop? Let's say I really like that new melodic loop. Let's lock it with the little 1-bar lock, right? I can filter it back into the mix if I want to. Sorry about the camera angles. Okay, so now that won't change. But I've got the volumes down on all the other tracks here, so I can unlock anything that maybe was locked and change the filters back to normal. So if I bring in the stab loop, we'll hear it in 1, 2, fading it up, 2, 3, 4, and down, 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 down. There's the stab loop we just brought in, and it's not locked. So every 16 bars, that will automatically change now. I've just paused the kick drum, and I'm waiting to bring it back in. In 1, 2, 3, bring it back now. Okay, here we just changed some melodic elements, but I didn't have to go back over there, right? Let's go ahead and bring these channels down. All right. Let's talk a little bit about the kick drum here. Let's go ahead and change up the bass line so it's not quite so boring as well. Just bringing up the filter on the Electronisounds bassline module, and let's change the pattern, which again is being sequenced from the Anti-Culture Precision Disruptor sequencer. Let's go back to the first pattern, and okay, so now we've got that bass line happening. Let's talk about the kick drum, right? Which for dub techno, let's face it, we typically want that 4 on the floor. We don't do a lot of change-ups on it. But what I've got here is I've got the Electronisounds drum sequencer actually sending out 4 different drum pattern rhythms to this kick drum. I can turn the kick drum off with this switch over here if I want to. Can also bring out some of those other percussion sounds. Now we're just hearing the bass line, right? I can bring the kick back in with a switch. I can leave that other percussion stuff off. It's key that you're able to interact with stuff, you know, and just turn things on or off. You have to be able to drive the ship yourself. It's not just a self-driving ship, right? I could bring in that offbeat hat. That's coming out of the Electronisounds Hi-Hats D module, which is different than their Hi-Hats A module. I've got control over the decay of that. So I can bring it, you know, really, and yeah, I've got a lot of delay happening on that hi-hat sound as well. But I can have a really short offbeat hat, really tight, right? Or I can open that up. So you can, you know, this really helps with the ebb and flow of your sessions. You know, when you're in a busy part, you might want that to be really open, you know, just cranking away. But for the most part, I keep it pretty dry. Let's go back to this bass line and kind of tuck it back in the mix a little bit by pulling the low pass filter down on that a little. Now let's change up the kick drum. What I'm using is I'm using a sequential switch from Electronisounds. It's accepting those trigger patterns, 4 different patterns coming out of my drum sequencer. And by pressing these buttons manually, I can switch between the bass drum rhythm. I can bring it even one more minimal than that. In 1. I can bring it back, right, by just bringing it back to the straight 4 on the floor. If I press one of these down here that doesn't have an input going on into it, I can literally just mute the kick drum. Now it's not receiving a trigger signal, and I can bring it back. So that allows me to vary up the kick drum for some of these parts. I can turn the clap on and off with the switch here. The switch that I'm using to turn these drums on and off is the DivKid Mutes module. I have these strategically placed throughout the case. I've got one here, I've got another one over here, I've got one over here. Remember, I tucked that ride cymbal back in the mix a while ago using this filter. It's not playing currently as I filter it up and nothing happens. But if I leave that filter up, the cutoff all the way up, that ride cymbal will now start coming in and out. Another really cool thing is that I've got another percussion sound entirely that I can bring in and out here. It's currently being filtered down, and it's being generated by this steady state fate entity percussion module. You heard that ride come back in. So I've got this percussion sound routed through a Nano Module's font filter, excuse me. I really like this filter as well. If I have maybe a second choice for like my favorite filters, I really like these Nano Module's font filters. It's just a low pass filter right now, and if I just start bringing up the cutoff, we can hear a percussion sound coming in. It's just going through a whole lot of space, reverb, and delay. That's being generated from a Happy Nerding Effects 8 Pro module set to the Reverb Space Station preset. So that percussion sound that I just brought in, I can take it out by just turning the cutoff on that filter down. And whenever I want like an accent hit for percussion, and then I can tuck it back again so we don't hear it. I could have used a switch to bring that, you know, in and out as well, but doing it this way means I can also kind of have it really dark in the mix and just kind of hanging out in the background for a while I'm doing other things, like maybe tweaking the pitch of that ride cymbal, or maybe I'm up here bringing in a stab sound, right? Maybe I love that stab and maybe I want to lock it in place. Maybe I didn't lock it very well. It's only a 1 bar lock, so I gotta wait till it hits. Now we've got it locked. I can filter that down if I want to tuck it back in the mix. really bring some vibes happening, right? I can bring up another percussion loop with the top loops. Maybe I love that and I want to lock it. I can bring up an effects loop here. These are just like, you know, very like subtle background texture-y kind of things, these effects loops. We don't always hear a real dramatic shift in the vibe when I bring that up. Now, you may remember I locked the virus loop before I turned it down. So now when I bring the volume up on the virus loops track, I'm bringing up whatever loop I had locked on that channel. This allows you to kind of like create your own sections and hold them for as long as you want, you know? And I can unlock it and have it change as soon as I unlock it. Let's say I love that. I can just lock that now. Bring up the other synth loops channel. So now some of these things are locked and some of them aren't, right? So we're deciding how much of the mix is now self-driving and how much of it is still changing automagically. I really appreciate everyone who's hanging out in the chat. Starting to be a little bit of a long one today. We've just passed an hour. If you have any questions at all, that would be a great time to ask them because I'm looking at the chat here. Hey, we got the Stinky Weasel in the chat. All right, thanks for tuning in. It's great to see you here. And yes, he's asking about the, bring some things down maybe so it's not quite so loud to talk over. I absolutely cannot recommend the Effects Aid Pros or the Effects Aid in general from Happy Nerding. I cannot recommend those enough. I have a lot of different Eurorack effects that I've experimented with. Change this bass line. Maybe we'll drop that kick for a minute. Bring up the, maybe just bring up these stabs a little. 1, 2, and 1, 2, 3, and those Effects Aid Pros, I cannot stress this enough. They are absolutely just the cream of the crop. They have like 200 plus algorithms that you can choose from, and you can, you know, depending on what model of those Happy Nerding Effects Aid Pros you've got, you can have a certain number of effects algorithms in your module at one time. I really like these big ones. Yes, they're very expensive, but they are so versatile, right? Anything from like the Eventide style black hole reverb emulation, we've got that in here. Again, here I'm using a Reverb Space Station reverb emulation. They've got everything from like lots of different delays, lots of different reverbs, flangers, choruses, all these different things you can use them for in the same, you know, effect package. So you're not really buying like one module, you're really buying like a wide selection of modules. And all of the algorithms in these are just fantastic. I can start filtering up that locked chord loop, right? And then we can unlock it in 1, 2, 3. Who knows what's gonna happen? Here we just change the melodic to something different, right? Go back to the 4 on the floor here. The ride cymbal just came back in. Again, I can filter that out if I want with the Erica Synths low pass VCF. Filtering it out. So it's just way back there now, barely audible. Let's say I love this chord. I've locked it. And let's say we want to bring something else in, like the virus loop that I locked. There's my 1. Right? Let's bring in the top loop. Let's change the bass line up. Filter down that chord stab. You're ready to bring in another 2, 3, 4. Start bringing out that virus loop. Let's bring in an effects loop. Again, those effects loops are really subtle, so we don't always just hear a big distinct change. Let's tame this bass line and change up the pattern. 2, 3, 4, 2, 3. Bring the kick back. Whoop. Try that again. 1, 2, 3. Bring the kick back. Start filtering those stabs back up into the mix. So by doing this with each channel having that low pass filter above the loop, you can really create that ebb and flow and start building your stuff into like sections, where certain sections have like a darker feeling and certain sections have like a brighter feeling. Let's go ahead and unlock that chord stab. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, unlock it. So this is, I can't stress this enough. That whole part of it is self-driving, but you can always get in there and control every element of it. I mean, I can get in there and control every element of it myself still, manually. Lo is asking a really interesting question about how a sequencer like the Polyend Play could be used to produce similar results. Well, I'm not exactly sure on that, but what I would do is I believe there's a way that we can like get MIDI controllers talking to the Polyend Play. I absolutely love the Polyend Play, especially the new Polyend Play Plus. For those of you who aren't already familiar with those machines, they're groove boxes, like 8-channel groove boxes, and also an 8-channel MIDI sequencer. So you can use them to sequence your external gear as well as the samples that are inside of those boxes. The Play Plus, however, allows you to load full stereo samples, so you're not limited to mono-only samples. I cannot stress how much that really affects the end of the sound. But it's hard to get most MIDI controllers working with your hardware because they don't have a 5-pin MIDI output. For example, the Novation launch control that I'm using here only has a USB output, right? You can get a little box that transfers that USB signal into a 5-pin MIDI signal, or sometimes into that 3.5 millimeter TRS MIDI signal. So that way you can connect up a controller like this with the Play. Or there's a company called Fader Fox, and they make really beautiful looking MIDI controllers that do have 5-pin MIDI out and that do have 3.5 millimeter outputs and stuff like that we can plug in directly to our hardware. So the key with using the Polyend Play for something like this conceptually would first be to have multiple patterns available to go back and forth between in the Play. Well, like say pattern 1 has different melodic parts than pattern 2, and pattern 3 has different melodic parts than pattern 1 and 2, etc., right? And then to have a controller, MIDI controller, set up so where you can control the volume of some of those tracks in real time. I really like those Fader Fox controllers. I mean, I don't have any experience with them, but I like the way they look, and they seem to be really high quality from what I've seen and heard in reviews of them. They are not cheap though. Let's say I want to lock that stab loop now. I just wait for it to happen again. Didn't get that one to lock, but I locked the one that came in. Now I can filter that down. Take the top loop out. we've got that. Could bring that ride back in. Could change the pitch of that ride how we like to do. And then the ride turns off. Again, every time we hear that, we get 16 bars on or off with the ride symbol. Everything else in the Eurorack, percussion-wise, is not set in any Automagic way. It's just set to my fingers. So I can bring in that kick drum. Let's focus on that kick drum for a moment. Gonna really tuck that bass line back while I talk about this. I've got the kick drum. We were speaking about the Happy Nerding Effects Aid Pro just a moment ago. And recently, they released another new algorithm for these. That's one of the things that makes them so great, is not only do you have the algorithms available, that are available to you currently, but they keep releasing more algorithms for these. So you may have, an effect coming in 2 or 3 months that you never even knew you needed, right? This one, I don't know if we can read it because StreamYard is forcing me to be on 720p. But if you can read that, the preset here is called Reverb Ducking. And if I just have a tiny little bit of auto ducking reverb on the kick drum. But if I bring do you hear how we just majorly created this like back upbeat reverb duck in the mix there? That's one of their new effects that I've just got barely running on that kick drum to give us a tiny little bit of that offbeat ducking reverb. I can bring in the hat with a switch here. Something we haven't talked about yet is some toms that I'm using to generate a sort of an interesting groove. I'm going to bring that ride cymbal out a little, and I'm actually going to just pop the volume out on the bass line for a second so we can focus on these toms. Here we've got the kick drum, but you hear there's some really nice analog sounding toms coming behind the kick drum and kind of randomly changing a bit. The module that I'm using for the toms is kind of hidden back here. We can't really see it so well. Maybe I can whoop whoop. It's the ADAC system T networks. I'm guessing that means tom networks. And I can change the pitch on these. If I want to. And we're hearing there's 4 toms in this module, so you can get those rolls if you want, where the toms change pitch and stuff. But what I'm using here to create a little bit more of an organic type of backbeat, whereas there's 2 different tom sounds, and they don't always hit in the same place. They kind of change which one is hitting. I'm sending the trigger signal that's, dun 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 dun. Right, I'm sending that trigger signal into a module called branches here, which is from Mutable Instruments, and it's just one trigger input. Like if I pull that trigger input out, no more toms, right? But what this does is every time it receives a trigger signal, it basically rolls like a virtual die, or flips a coin rather, and if the coin comes up heads, it's gonna, send that trigger signal out of output 1. If it comes up tails, it's gonna send that trigger signal out of output number 2. So I never know which of the 2 toms we're actually going to trigger here. So the toms are constantly sort of organically shifting around, always staying in the same rhythm and just providing a cool little backbeat. If I want, I can filter those down because I've got the output of that toms module going through another nano module's font filter. I don't usually find the need to filter them out of the mix, but if you're listening on headphones or good monitor speakers, you can hear that I can pretty much just filter them away and they're just sort of gone. And I'm using, again, that font filter down here for the same exact purpose with another percussion sound. right? So at any time I can sort of bring that sound in, and at any time I want to, I can sort of tuck those toms back in the mix or have them be really present. I can bring that offbeat hat back in. And lastly, to complement the end of the percussion, I can always turn a clap on or off. Okay? Now, to change up the timbre on that clap, the clap is just a sample. It's being controlled, rather being sequenced through another sample module. I have a lot of sample-based modules here, so I can really get the exact type of sounds that I want by using my samples. This is another Tip Top Audio 1 sampler. Those of you who might remember, that's the same sampler up here that I'm using for the Ride. This one has the black faceplate that I found from an Etsy seller. It's sitting next to another, Tip Top Audio 1 sampler, which is where that big down filter is coming out of. I really like these Tip Top Audio 1 samplers, but filter that extra percussion sound out. But we're talking about the clap. Talking about the clap. But that's being run through another Erica Sense filter. For those of you who've been hanging out, you might remember that I said I'm really just into the Erica Sense filters. This is a black Polyvox filter, so it's based on the filter chips from the Polyvox Russian synthesizer from back in the day, which has a really specific sound, and you can get some really screaming high resonance tones out of this particular filter. I can filter that clap sound down and sort of change the way that the timbre on that is happening in the mix. I can sort of tuck it back, right? If I want, I can crank up the resonance on that bad boy. Now that clap is getting really sharp. I can bring it back in the mix, or I can find a sweet spot, right, where it's just hitting a lot of that resonance and really cutting through the mix. Contain that resonance and just sort of tuck that clap back in the mix if we want. But I find that that's really key, that the more sounds we can individually run through, their own filters, that's just a great way to be able to sculpt the sounds in real time, the timbre of them. So again, I got that percussion that I can bring in whenever I want. It's just being filtered down. But I just bring the filter up and there it is. Or I bring the filter up just a little and I have it as a background sound to work with maybe a top loop, which we locked in place a while ago. It's still that same top loop. I can unlock it, 2, 3, and now we get it different. A little bit of a hi-hat thing happening in the background. Let's bring up that stab loop that we locked, which is being filtered down, so it's way back in the mix. I'll start filtering it up. Great question from Simon, who asks, do I do a lot of repatching on the system, or do I leave it in a preferred setup? I actually, I'm a really big patch from scratch kind of guy. For those of you who, are familiar with my channel, all of my live performances or my live jams are typically, different from the last one. I bring out a different piece of gear. Sometimes it's the Eurorack, sometimes it's just, regular hardware. I have several different Eurorack cases. We got another case of other modules over here, for example. Got another case out of the shop down here. We've got the nano modules, Kaisha case that I use sometimes. And I really just like to patch from scratch every time I do something, every time I do a project. I actually set this set up a few weeks ago and recorded for my most recent live set that I just posted on the channel the other day for an online festival called Clown Fest. And I've just been kind of letting it sit here and not broken anything down because I really wanted to do a live stream on this particular setup and try to explain how it works. There's that loop that we locked. Still just sitting there, riding away, right? I can change that out and unlock it in 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, unlock it. And here how the timbre of that synth loop just changed because it picked another synth loop. And bring up the other channels here. Yeah, Lo says using the Polyend play to sequence MIDI CC would be a huge step in that direction. Absolutely would. You can have different, you know, like say, lock these two melodic loops and filter them down so I can talk over it a little easier. You could have the MIDI CC on one pattern, for instance, doing what I've just done here, controlling the cutoff on an external synthesizer to where in some sections it brings that cutoff way down. And now we're just sort of chilling, giving you opportunity to mess with some other things maybe. Like filtering up the bass line, which I unplugged the volume on. Let's plug that back in. Let's get some bass back in here. One, two, and 1, 2, 3. Change it up. We got Chris asks, do I have a mastering chain for live use? That's a great question. I don't, as a matter of fact. I really wish I had something like an end of chain limiter or something like that, or compression for the vocal mic or something like that, but I've got nothing. The vocal mic is being fed directly into the large Soundcraft mixer down here, which I actually am not a fan of, by the way. I do not recommend this mixer. Hindsight is 2020. This is the STK 22 channel, individual 22 channels over USB version of that mixer. But it doesn't record a very hot level when you use it with a computer. And let's get ready to unlock these melodic loops. In 1, 2, 3, unlock them. And now we just changed to something else, right? Bring in the stab. And let's unlock that. 2, 3, and mess with that ride. Filter down that clap. Let's drop that kick. Let's mess with that bass line. And bring the kick back in 3, 4. Let's filter down that stab. Let's add a top loop. An effects loop. Right. Tolenza says sometimes they get bogged down with too many sequencers in Eurorack. And do I prefer one master sequencer or no? That is a fantastic question. My biggest concern with the sequencers is that I really need everything to start on the one. I need all of the sequencers to know when that downbeat is, right? So that the claps are hitting on the 5 and 13, and that, you know, everything hits on the 1, and when 3, 4, 2, 2. So like I really have my sense of time, right? So I'm really a fan of like having something as the master clock, and then I'm gonna need to duplicate that signal a lot. I'm using a Rides in the Storm quad passive multiple to send lots of different copies of the clock signal and the reset signal to any other sequencers that I may be using. In this setup, I'm not actually really using the black sequencer from Erica Synths for anything other than just to help get the MIDI signal from the laptop and to change that into a clock signal. but then I'm duplicating that because I've got one sequencer for the bass line, and then one sequencer, a very large sequencer for the drums here. So I can but yes, you can easily get bogged down with too many sequencers, and my problem with that has been it sometimes can be difficult in a smaller case, to get 6 copies of the clock out to many different sequencers. I'm using the Euclidean circles sequencer up here at the top to trigger like just the ride, I think, in this particular setup, but sometimes I use that one as well, and I really need everything, to know when that downbeat is. So I really like as if I had to pick one that I consider my main sequencer per se, it would be the black sequencer from Erica Synths. Because not only can I use an external MIDI source to get it started, but I can also send a MIDI out signal from this if I want to use like the Eurorack with, say, any other kind of hardware, for example, and not the laptop. Because I don't really do a lot of hybrid stuff between Ableton and the Eurorack. I may be just trying to send like a clock signal over here to the Virus, for example, and I can do that with the Erica Synths Black Sequencer because it has the 3.5mm MIDI out that you just, use an adapter, turn that into 5-pin MIDI, and you're good to go there. Can't count. 4, 2. Let's change the bass line. Change it again. These are some of the pre-programmed patterns that I've got in the Anti-Culture Precision Disruptor sequencer, which takes up a lot of room. Some of these things are really difficult to use in a small system. Just change it again. Now we change to a pattern that has a lot more accents and a lot more slides in it. And I can start getting a little bit more aggressive with that bass line, right? Bring up that extra percussion sound. Start filtering up the ride again. Bring up a loop on the Virus Darkstar. 1, 2, 3. Bring it up now. Again, these are loops that I made from the Virus, but the Virus is off. It's not being controlled here. If I like that loop, I can lock it in place. Bring up the chord stab. Right? So some things are automatically changing all the time, and some things are locked in place. Yeah, but I really do wish I had some sort of a mastering chain for live use. For those who may have missed the beginning, what is handling the mixing duties here is the 1010 Music Bluebox recorder and mixer. It's a 12 mono tracks or 6 stereo tracks or any combination of stereo and mono tracks you like. And it has EQ per channel, gain per channel, volume per channel, and effects per channel as well. So I'm just making sure to not clip any of those channels. Then it's being fed over here to an Erica Synths Black output module, which allows me to get, some nice heavy-duty 1/4-inch cables coming out. And then those are being fed directly into the Soundcraft mixer down below. You see the level happening over here. My mic is being fed directly into this mixer as well. And then I've got a set of outputs over here going into this audio interface back here. This interface is connected to the large Mac that I am streaming with. And the reason that the stream is just a one camera, really, ghetto style stream today is because my large Mac doesn't run OBS anymore. You have to have like the most new operating system to run OBS on a Mac, and I don't have that available on that on this big Mac. It's only like 4 or 5 years old, but that's how Apple get you to keep buying a new one and keep buying a new one, right? So we're streaming with StreamYard today, which is why we're limited to a 720p stream. So sorry about the resolution. Wow, we've got 37 people watching the stream. Wow, that's so cool. Thanks for hanging out, everyone. If anybody has any questions at all, now would be a great time. I think I've explained pretty much everything that I've got going in this setup. I think it's actually a pretty straightforward and simple setup. The drums are all coming out of the Eurorack, except for some percussion here. 2, 3, bring it up. Let's bring up a synth loop. We've got one locked here. You see now I'm driving it, right? So we can take it anywhere we want to take it. In 1, 2, 3, bring it back. Change the bass. 2, 3, change it up. Got that synth part locked though. So as long as I want to stay in this kind of a more upbeat, aggressive section, bring up the synth stab track. We don't know what it's going to sound like when I bring it in, right? Thank you, Rabbit Bat. Thank you, Simon. But yeah, no limiter, no extra compression, none of that stuff. No mastering chain whatsoever. And that's a disappointment. I would love to have something at the end of the chain that we could really, pump the compression, glue everything together, put a limiter at the end and, push into that limiter just a little bit. I hope the stream isn't too loud and distorting. If anyone's listening on quality speakers, let's unlock that virus loop. Let's do it. I really find the combination of keeping some things locked and some things constantly evolving really helps with that ebb and flow. But if we want to lock it all, we just lock it down. And now this won't change. I can be over here worrying about things like the drums, the bass line. 1, 2, bring the kick back. I feel like that did change. Maybe I didn't lock it right. Nope. It was locked. I'm just tripping, I guess. But I can try to lock it down again. I can filter that down. I can bring out that virus. Get ready to mess with the bass. Change the pattern. Start bringing the kick back in subtly. In 1, 2, 3, and start filtering that stab back up. And bring the kick back up. Hey, Big John UK in the chat. It's good to see you. Sounds fantastic through a home theater setup with the sub. That's fantastic. That melody is from Ableton. Oh, we got Lucas just tuning in. Yes. Let's see if I can break this down a little bit. We've got 5 different tracks in Ableton, each of which is set up with about 50 to 100 custom loops that I made. The loops are mostly from my sample packs, like Devious Dub Techno and Dean's Dub Bunker. Some of them are going to be coming up on an upcoming sample pack for the Polyend Tracker Mini, which I absolutely love because it loads full stereo samples and you're not limited to mono samples only. That's actually the pack that I'm working on currently with most of my time, is the pack for the Polyend Tracker Mini called Dub Spectrum. Because you guys know I'm Dean and I love the dub. But so what we're using Ableton here for is on each of these 5 channels. Right now we're hearing this sort of dub chord, right? And I'm filtering that up. I've got it set using the follow actions in Ableton that every 16 bars it will automagically change to a different loop on that channel. And I make all of the loops in this session in the same tempo and in the same key. I'm going to unlock this loop. And hear how the melodic part just changed? I'm going to have hands free for a minute, and that loop will play for 16 bars. And at the end of those 16 bars, it's going to randomly choose another melodic loop to play on that channel. That gives my hands time to play with other things in the session. And we hear how the melodics changed from Ableton, but I didn't have to change it manually. If I really like what's happening, I can lock it down to a 1 measure loop. On each of the 5 channels in Ableton, I've got a low pass filter. So now I can filter down that melodic loop and tuck it back in the mix. I can now bring up another one of the 5 channels in Ableton, like this percussion loop. This leaves my hands free while things are kind of automagically changing on this side or staying the same, but that gives my hands time to start messing with other things, like adjusting the bass line, or filtering down the clap, or bringing in more percussion. Let's change the bass. Now I can say come back over to the MIDI controller that's connected to Ableton. Nope, no ES9, Lucas. It's very simple setup. There's no multi-tracked audio happening. I'm going to filter that down again and bring some of these things out. None of the audio is going back into the laptop. It's very sort of like a bohemian setup. The audio that we're hearing is all being mixed through the 1010 Music Bluebox mixer and recorder. And I'm just sending a 2-channel mix of that down to my big mixer. My mic that I'm using right now is also plugged into this mixer. And then I've got an output from this mixer going into an audio interface, which is plugged into my big Mac, which is what we're streaming with. I find that as soon as you try to get audio from any setup, as soon as you, because this is what everybody wants to do, right? We all want to get that multi-track audio back into Ableton. But I've never been able to achieve that. I find that the latency is just overwhelming. When you try to like send audio out, maybe send it through another device or another mixer of any kind, and then get that back into Ableton. For like, I have a mantra, right? And that is milliseconds matter. And they really do. If you try to get that audio, you know, some people are able to achieve this kind of thing. I've tried so many different setups and so many different times to try to achieve that type of thing, so that maybe we could, you know, send some of these into Ableton and use Ableton effects on some of these sounds and all that stuff. But milliseconds matter. And as soon as you get, you know, 5, 10, 15 milliseconds off on some sounds, your kick is flamming and it just sounds terrible to me. So that's why I've decided at the end of the day to use the 1010 Bluebox mixer and recorder. I'm sending just 2 channels of it now, but if I want to, I can cue each of the individual channels that I'm routing audio in. I can cue those to record individual tracks. So some of my live performances, I will record the individual tracks and then load those tracks up into something like Ableton, where I can then sort of master it per se on an individual track basis. But never in real time am I ever feeding audio back into Ableton from anything. I'm always doing the actual mixing, and what you hear of the music via something else. Let's unlock that stab. So suddenly we're off into a different vibe, right? Because I can just lock it, or I can have it automatically changing. Right, he has that problem with the ES9, always crushing it to the latency. I find that you can pretty much go one direction, meaning you can use some external sequencers to maybe sequence the sounds in Ableton, or you can use Ableton to sequence some external stuff, or send audio from Ableton into your external stuff. But as soon as you want to go round trip, the latency is just outrageous. And again, I know some people are able to get that kind of thing set up, maybe some magic wizards, but in my experience, I haven't been able to achieve that. Let's go ahead and unlock all of these loops here so that Ableton is just automagically shuffling, and let's bring all of these up. So I've got the background bed here happening, 5 individual tracks happening in Ableton. Each track has about 50 to 100 loops on those tracks, and I've carefully sculpted them so they will all fit together no matter what Ableton spits out. Just filtering the clap back in here. I'll filter another percussion sound in here for fun. There it is. I'll filter it out again. And here we go. We're going to switch up the melodics. And I didn't have to touch anything. But if I really like this, I can lock it all down with a 1-bar looper that I've created in Ableton. I can then filter anything I want down. So I'm still driving the ship whenever I want to drive it. Can drop that kick. Bring this ride back in. 1, 2, bring the kick back. So there's that crash, but none of the melodic stuff changed. I can filter it back up again. And I can unlock it, 2, 3, 4, and it will just randomly go back to its Automagic. Chris is asking how Ableton is connected to the rest of the setup. Let's change that bass line. In 1, 2, 3, change it up. Ableton is my main clock here. Let's tuck that ride back with a filter. And let's tuck that clap back with a filter. Okay, so Ableton is my master clock here, and I'm taking a USB to 5-pin MIDI adapter. It's a USB-C, it's just a generic, Lackato USB-C to MIDI, and it's got a USB-C connection on one side, and a 5-pin MIDI input, and a 5-pin MIDI output. I'm not sending any MIDI into Ableton, so I've just got the input just hanging loose here. And I've got the MIDI out connected to an adapter, which then plugs into the Erica Synths Black sequencer, which is really only being used in this setup to just turn that MIDI signal into Eurorack clock and reset. So I'm taking a clock output and a reset signal output, and I'm using those signals to drive my bassline sequencer, which is the Anti-Culture Precision Disruptor, and my main drum sequencer here, which is the Erica Synths drum sequencer. I've got some switches that I can turn the drums on and off with, and lots of different filters so I can filter the sounds in and out. I'm a really big fan of the Erica Synths filters. I'm a really big fan of the Erica Synths bass line module as well. And I can use the Precision Disruptor sequencer to change that bass line and really, go between different sections and different vibes. Let's bring in a top loop. So that was a shaker loop. And that's the loop that we locked down a moment ago. Let's bring in some stabs. Let's unlock the stabs loop so it can do something else. And if I want to lock that down, it's a 1-bar lock. And I can filter that down with a low-pass filter to keep my ebb and flow happening. Just tuck it. Let's bring in an effects loop. Let's bring in another synth loop. Sort of a background texture. That synth loop is not locked, so every 16 bars it's going to randomly pick another synth loop from that channel. Let's bring in a virus loop. These are loops that I recorded out of the Virus Dark Star synthesizer. Let's say I love that and I want to lock it down. Let's lock it down. Now that virus won't change. See, we just heard our but that virus loop didn't change. I can tuck it back in the mix with a low-pass filter. What's happening, Paul? I can start filtering up those stabs. I can get ready to unlock the stab. Now the stab is gone and replaced with another melodic loop. But the other is still being locked in place, and I can start filtering that in. Let's drop the kick. 1, 2, 3, 4. Get ready to unlock that arpeggio. Now something else is happening. Can change up that pattern on the kick. Can lock everything into place over here. Can filter it down. It all just stays the same, and I can just sort of tuck it back in the mix with those low-pass filters. Simon says that he can feel his wallet burning. Yeah, the thing with Eurorack is a lot of people, might post comments under my videos like, isn't there a cheaper way to do that? And I can't stress this enough. Yes, you can make music with any devices, including just your phone, or just your iPad, or just a laptop, All of this stuff is like, this is not the cheap way to go. It's not the quick way to go. It is just a way to go. And I just like to play with the gear. I'm very blessed that I'm a sound designer, that I run Electronisounds for a living, and that, I need to be always making new sounds and new samples. The Dub Techno pack that I'm currently working on for the Polyend Tracker Mini is already over 600 brand new one-shot sounds and loops. It's called Dub Spectrum. I've put countless hours into that one already. I can start filtering up this stab. Try to keep the rhythm in my head to bring the kick back to 4/4 when it's appropriate. Let's try it here. 3 and unfilter that clap. Can bring the pitch down on that ride. Another thing that people don't realize is this stuff, when you have such a setup this large, it really brings the temperature up in the room. It's a pretty cold day outside, and I'm in here and it's very warm right now. Just trying to see if there's any other questions in the chat. We've been going for about an hour and 50 minutes. That's a great question, Chris. Chris is asking how I'm getting the audio from Ableton into the mixer. All I'm doing is I've got over here on the laptop that's running Ableton. It's connected to another audio interface. This could be any audio interface, but I'm happening to use the Apollo Solo audio interface, and I've got the left and right main outputs from that just running directly into the Bluebox over here. So I'm just literally sending I'm sending the entire mix from Ableton just right over here into the Bluebox. So everything is the Bluebox has individual EQ per channel, individual effects per channel. It also has a big built-in compressor on the master channel, but I don't use that because I find it adds a lot of noise to the mix. Bring in a top loop from Ableton. Start building it back up again, right? Bring in a synth loop. Bring in the stab channel. The Stinky Weasel asks if it uses a lot of power, and then he clarifies that with asking specifically about the Bluebox. The Bluebox, it doesn't use, I don't think necessarily a lot of power. But what it does need is it does need a lot of 5-volt power. I guess a lot of the Eurorack, this is a custom Eurorack case that I had built, and for some reason it doesn't supply any 5-volt power. But whereas the Kaisha case that I use a lot and did a video on, that supplies plenty of 5-volt power. So when I was originally trying to power the Bluebox and my big case, it wouldn't even power on. And I tried that in the Kaisha case, and it worked just fine in the Kaisha case and powered on no problems. But to get it going in the larger Eurorack, I actually made a video on that, and it's on my channel, about powering the Bluebox, because it does need a lot of 5-volt power, and you need a pretty substantial module to push that 5-volt power. And for that, I'm using an 4MS brand Pro Power 45. And that's got its own individual power source that's separate from all of the other modules in this case. And that is providing the 5-volt power to the Bluebox, rather than just the default power in the system. But a lot of the all-in-one cases, specifically, I don't have, an unlimited amount of them, but specifically the Kaisha case from Nano Modules absolutely does provide enough 5-volt power so that you don't need a separate power supply just for that Bluebox mixer. I really like, that you can run the channels into it individually. You can do 12 mono tracks or 6 stereo tracks with the Bluebox, or any combination of those. So you could have, 3 stereo tracks and 6 mono tracks if you wanted to. And another really great thing about the Bluebox is that it accepts Eurorack signal and line level signal without any sort of worries there. So you can plug any combination of Eurorack and regular line level gear into that without having to worry about being too hot on the levels or something. And you can record those tracks as individual tracks. You can record 12 separate mono tracks if you want for a good 20 minutes, and then load 12 mono tracks up into Ableton and do some mixing and mastering there. They won't snap to the grid in Ableton, mind you, but you can still use, like, if you have plugins that you love, like maybe the FabFilter Pro Q3, which I really like for EQ or stuff like that, you can run those type of plugins on the tracks that you record individually here if you want to. I started with the desktop version of the Bluebox mixer a few years ago, and it's the same. It just doesn't have 12 individual inputs. It only has 6 stereo inputs. So you need to use like an adapter if you want to, run a bunch of mono inputs. Whereas the Eurorack version of the Bluebox has all 12 inputs available just right on the front with no adapters. That's really awesome. Steve is asking a great question. What's the sample and loop pack from Electronisounds? In this setup, I'm using a lot of samples from the Devious Dub Techno sample pack and a lot of samples from the Dean's Dub Bunker sample pack. Both of those are in the key of F minor. The Devious Dub Techno pack is focused on 104 BPM, and the Dean's Dub Bunker pack is focused at 110 BPM. But if you're using Ableton, it's really easy to get those tempos to just work, at a cohesive tempo. You can filter that down, bring another stab. And a lot of the content here also is going to be from my upcoming Dub Spectrum pack for the Polyend Tracker Mini, which I'm not like the biggest fan of the build quality of this guy. The buttons are a little bit squishy, but when you're using it, it's a blast to work with, and it loads full stereo samples. So you're not limited to mono only samples like you are with the OG tracker. Full stereo samples, 8 tracks. And it's just, it's like if you like playing a Game Boy or have, memories of that kind of stuff from back in the day, it's a really fun thing to interact with and to build up music with. Get ready to unlock these melodic loops in 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, unlock them. And the vibe goes off in its own direction, and you just sort of work with that. Maybe mess with the bass a little. You bring that ride back in. Maybe filter down that clap. Maybe bring up that percussion. Let's change the bass line again. In 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's lock down that that gated percent loop. Lock it down and filter it down. So now that's gonna stay, and it won't change like the other loops. bring some more decay on that open hi-hat, really get that open hi-hat going. Mess with the tuning of this ride. Start with filtering that synth loop back in. I actually have zero light gain, Paul. I don't have any special lights of any kind. Basically what we have is just the lights that the actual modules provide here, and that's it. I don't have any, I have really bright lights around the room, you know, to get the light on me, but that's it. My visuals game is very much lacking. We got Skirk in the chat. Hey, thanks for tuning in. Good to see you. We got Mike Moorfield in the chat. What's happening, my friend? All right. Yeah, stay healthy. You too, man. Happy New Year, Mike. Good to see you. Oh my gosh, we're up to 47 people hanging out. All right. This is just a fun stream today because I really wanted to, talk a little bit more about this setup because I'm not often doing that, that hybrid stuff using Ableton and the modular like this. And again, go ahead and actually stop that for a minute. And it takes so long, again, like the content here in the laptop is really based on those sample packs that took months and months for each of those to be created. So it's not like this is something that I can whip together in a couple of days. This is like something that I really put a unmeasurable amount of time into. So I thought it would be a really great opportunity to share this. All right, so we just passed the 2-hour mark. It's getting really warm in here, and I think I've gone through just about everything in the setup. If anybody has any more questions, I'd be happy to stick around for a few more and answer those. But I don't want to just be a pretentious guy and just just jam on forever. But I had no idea we were going to get this many people tuning in, and I really appreciate, you all hanging out for the stream. I haven't been doing a lot of live streams lately. It was a year when I did a live stream every single week, but people just don't realize how much time and energy that takes a lot of the time. It was taking me about 3 days a week to pull that off. One day to come up with what you're going to do, and another day to start setting that up, and then a day to do the stream. And then I go back through these streams and I, put the timestamps in so that they have more of a replay value to people who aren't watching live on the stream to still get that information. And that takes as long as the stream went. Like, we're over 2 hours now. It's going to take me over 2 hours to go back and watch this live stream and try to put in the timestamps of where I'm talking about specific things, so that people can still get that information easily. Steve Ward is asking, what's the sample pack called? The majority of the samples that we're hearing on the Ableton side of things are either from the Devious Dub Techno pack that you can find on Electronisounds.com, or from the Dean's Dub Bunker sample pack, which you can also find on Electronisounds.com. I have lots of sample packs for lots of different boxes. And I also have just, plain wave format sample packs. I really love the dub, in case you haven't, gathered that already. So I have quite a few sample packs that feature that, this type of sound. That's what I'm working on again. But I also have a lot of sample packs and sound banks for individual boxes, like the Digitact. I have a huge Dub Techno sound bank for the 1010 black box that has like 50 inspiration kits to get you started making stuff like this. I have tons of sound banks for the Electron Digitact, everything from, not really a big Dub Techno stuff in there, because the Digitact's hard drive is actually really, really small, and when you start adding the delay onto these chords and stuff like that, the samples get pretty long and pretty big, megabyte wise, pretty quickly. So most of my packs for the Digitact are other genres like drum and bass and techno and stuff like that. But I do have lots of sample packs that are specifically tailored to the format of individual boxes, like the Polyend Play. I have two huge sound banks for the Polyend Tracker. I meant to say the Polyend Play. I actually have like 30 sound banks for or something. This is what I do, with my time. I'm either, creating, live music to put up on the channel, and if I'm not doing that, then I'm working on sounds for the next sound bank. This is my absolute passion and just what I really love to do with my time. I love to provide people with new sounds and new inspiration, to make, their music with. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just make sure I'm not missing any last minute questions. Thanks, Big John. I really appreciate you hanging out. Thanks, Steve. All right. Paul says I might check out Soma Illuminator for lighting effects. Thank you for the tip, Paul. I will absolutely check that out because I really need to do something with my lighting game. It's pretty ghetto, all things considered. I just have big lights in the other half of the room. You know what I mean? Just like, a little desk lamp over here in the corner. Normally I would try to do like multiple cameras on these live streams, but on this one specifically, I'm having to use StreamYard, which isn't really friendly to multiple cameras unless you pay like $50 a month, and I don't do enough live streaming to make that viable. I usually would live stream from this laptop, but I'm actually using that, in this setup, so I'm not really able to do that. I'm going to go ahead and I guess just leave you guys with a little bit of, I'm going to shut up for a bit and just jam the set a little bit because I really like the vibe on this one. I'm going to go ahead and get that going again. We've got the bass and the drums coming from the Eurorack. Let's change that bass line. Let's start bringing in some of these elements from Ableton and build it up a little. All right. We're going to go ahead and call it for today. I really appreciate you guys hanging out. How many hours did we do without stopping? Today was just about 2 hours and 15 minutes. I'm pretty famous for doing like really long-winded streams of like 3 hours, 3.5 hours. But I think we got pretty much all of it covered in detail today, hopefully. And again, just really appreciate everybody hanging out. Somebody asked, would the Dub Techno Deep Dive Pack work on the Bitbox MK2 Eurorack module? The samples themselves should absolutely load into that. In fact, the samples from that particular pack, the Dub Techno Deep Dive Pack for the 1010 black box, will load into anything that loads samples. However, the 50 included patterns to get you started are just specific to the 1010 black box. But there's just thousands, I think, of Dub Techno. It's a huge deep dive that'll keep you busy for like years to come, making Dub Techno with that pack specifically. All right. Happy New Year, everyone. Yeah, I hope everyone is healthy. I hope everyone is hanging in there. I'm not going to get into a political rant about the state of things in the U.S., although I could easily do that because things are pretty crazy here these days. But I am really hoping that 2024 is a great year for everyone. And I just want to thank everyone one more time for tuning in. And let's see if I can figure out how to end this stream now. All right. Until next time. Keep smiling, everyone, and take care of each other. Take care of each other. All right. Thanks again for hanging out, everyone.